Hello, everyone. I don't know all that are on the line, but it's really a great opportunity to connect with people that I've known in the past. And I thought that I ought to start by uh, describing what's happened to my class or what's happened to the group of folks back in the early and mid 70s professionally, so that you can kind of get a sense of the all-stars team that we have. And I'm sure we have many more that I don't know. But Dean Palos, my good friend, was the director of Johnson County, Kansas agency for many years. Tom Clark, if he's on, is a professor emeritus at the University of Colorado. Major Clark, who may or may not be on, he and I were in the joint program of law and planning. Major is the acting general counsel of the Small Business Administration, federal level. Nancy Nelson, who I don't think is on, but I remember fondly, is an environmental planner and author and consultant all over the United States, and she's very good at what she does. Cynthia Kurtz. I could talk a long time about Cynthia Kurtz. Cynthia was a student, a colleague, an employee, and someone who ended up being, among other many things, city manager for the city of Pasadena, which has to be the cushiest job in America. That's all I can say. And Bill Millar, if Bill is on, Bill was probably the most distinguished as he became the the executive director of the Port of Allegheny County, which was all the transit systems, and president of the U.S. Association of Transit Authorities, very significant position. Chuck asked me to talk about, or I suggested that I talk about what I have learned about planning. And I thought that might be useful, particularly for the students in the audience, if there are some, and maybe for others, I don't know. But let me tell you what I have learned. I have learned that the definition of planning is actually summed up quite easily. It's the avoidance of risk and uncertainty. And I think that that definition applies to the public or private sector's planning work that is done. Much of what is accomplished, much of what is done by planners is to help people understand risk, to examine the alternatives, and then to recommend a course of action that will optimize benefit and minimize risk, public or private. And I've been in both. That's my definition of planning. As to what are the major influences that I've learned about in the planning profession, and I've been a planner at an executive level at every level of government for my career, and probably an equal amount of time public and private and nonprofit. What I think the greatest influence of planning is, and I'm biased because I'm a lawyer, is the law. The law, whether it be legislation or court decisions, or the process of coming up with policies that are then enshrined somehow in written law, basically is the framework that is extremely important to the operation of planning activities. And I would not underrate its influence. A close second, in my experience, is money. Money meaning the seductive influence of federal dollars, and for that matter, state dollars, depending on where you are. But money and profitability within a corporate setting are definitely keys to and influence the direction that planning goes. So beyond the law, money and the way money is distributed and allocated becomes critical to the exercise of planning activity. Third, and something I know too little about, is big data and artificial intelligence. I believe that the sophistication and growth of predictive analytics and the application of computer technology to predictive analytics is the major driving force in the future for planning, certainly in the corporate realm, but even more so, perhaps even more so in the local realm. Again, all about reducing uncertainty, which is where I really believe the profession is at this point in time. I also think that we have as planners, regardless of what our position, what I've learned is that we have a lot of blind spots. And they're not blind spots that in any way are intentional, but they are vitally important in shaping how we approach a problem or put forward a plan of action or a plan in general. They're a major threat to successful planning. And here are the ones that I believe are obstacles. Politics, the most vexing part of planning at any level, is trying to somehow direct politics in a direction that is rational and good for the community, whether it be private setting or public. Second, ideologues. People who follow a particular ideology or belief system that can't get rid of the belief in that system, and then it becomes reflected in their work. And I'm not talking here about the Robert Moses type of theory about the development of cities or the evolution of cities. I'm talking here about partisan ideology that may or may not be popular, but in any event, does constrain the way people look at the future. Third, peers and colleagues. In so many instances, your peers and colleagues shape what you believe and how you look at the world and how you want to look at the world. And it's vitally important to hear what others say. It's vitally important to consult with others in the profession. But bottom line, it's vital to make your own decision, and a decision that is not the influence of or the outcome of consultation. And then I've already mentioned the lure of money. In politics, in planning, in any of the activities that we operate in, money creates blind spots. And the problem with all of this, and the problem with our blind spots, and what we have to overcome as professionals, is to understand that we need to do root cause analysis. We need to think about what are the roots of all of this, and how might those roots reveal what we ought to be doing, what direction we ought to be going. This is so greatly illustrated by the current circumstance of discussions of racial inequality. It is so well articulated in the statistics reflecting poverty in America. It is so clear that if 30% of the population lives under the poverty line and is unemployed, that we have a very serious problem that's endemic to the way our society has operated, is operating, and it creates a blind spot, has created a blind spot. Let me give you an example of the paragon of planning at one time, Portland, Oregon. Portland, Oregon just completed, after 12 years, a comprehensive plan. Portland, Oregon has 38,000 homeless people. Nowhere in that plan will you find any mention or strategy for coping with what is arguably society's greatest plague. We have probably 2 million people who are on the street tonight that are unintended, that are not part of anybody's plan, unless it's to secure funding from the federal government, usually from HUD, where HUD defines terms that none of us would really recognize. So I say, we have a blind spot created by all of these factors that we really need to constantly be on the alert to make sure we're doing root cause analysis. Let me talk a moment about weakness. And it's my weakness. As I've reflected on this opportunity, is to tell you, I believe as a professional planner, having been in many different roles, all of them planning related, that I was weak in understanding budgeting. I was weak in understanding finance. I was weak in understanding computer technology. And to be honest, I avoided them as I reflect back. I avoided them because they didn't seem relevant at the time. But they're extremely important. And I would say that my weakness is in those three areas. The final thing that I'll mention, and I'd love to hear what everybody has to say, their thoughts. But the final thing that I would mention is that I don't think we can understate or overstate enough the importance of responding to current social conditions. I'm not talking about the fad of the day or monuments or any of that business. I'm talking rather about underlying conditions that we cannot ignore, or if we do, we ignore it to our peril. That's kind of what I've learned about planning. I love the fact that I'm a planner. I love the fact that I went to the University of Iowa. And, I just have great associations with what I did in Jessup Hall and all over town, actually. Had a wonderful time. And I've learned a lot in the process, but I've learned most of all, we can help people see the future and how to get there. That's what I think, Chuck. That's it.
Okay, I could start it off with questions, but let me ask, let Lucy is applauding, let others ask questions or make comments. And you just unmute yourself if you want to speak.
I'll start.
Don, Major Clark.
Major.
Good to see you. It's a little bit after 8:15 on the East Coast, so I'm staying up late just to see you. It's unfortunate that it's been all these years. You remember I tried to help you with those weaknesses when you were in school, but you resisted.
Did.
And so here we are. But advancing and moving forward, one question I have, and I sent it to you, Chuck. I don't know if you received it, but it's dealing with what I characterize as the new world that we are moving in as a result of the pandemic, and wanting to understand a little bit about the role of planning in helping to shape that new role, recognizing, as you quite well said, that the tools that we used to use are not necessarily going to be valid or useful moving forward. I mean, we're looking at a world now when we are trying to reopen our facilities of talking about social distancing, restructuring the office space, restructure and moving toward telework and other types of things. Then we put that label, we lay that on top of the whole issue of nationalism versus globalization. Countries are basically saying, no, this is my territory and we do not want international interference. So we have a whole series of issues that are out there that transcend a lot of the stuff that we learned back with Jim Harris and Barbara and that whole crew, and even in the law school with Vestal and with the folks who did not want to believe that we were serious about taking law as well as planning. And I truly agree with you that the law has been the basis of opening many a door for me in this world. I haven't been in the planning arena directly, but I've been in the economic development arena. So all of this is kind of coming now to a head in terms of everything that happened back in the time when we were in school and shaping this new world. I want to see what your thoughts are.
Thanks, Major. It's wonderful. First of all, it's wonderful to see a co-joint law and planning graduate from the University of Iowa.
I'm another one.
We went.
Oh, okay.
Oh, good. I'm so glad.
But
Yeah.
Yeah, I passed in both programs.
Okay.
Very good.
but
So-
Don and Major, you must have been the first, right?
We were not the first. Close.
Yeah, close to the first. Yeah, yeah.
Close to the first.
I don't think they really realized what they had when they admitted us to that to the law school. But be as it may, we made it. We showed them new light.
Well, to answer your question, which is fundamentally in light of changes that appear to be occurring in society, and I'll say appear because I'm not persuaded that there's a deep commitment in the hearts of people, of leadership. I looked over the Iowa curriculum in planning and public policy, and I looked at each one of the courses. And while it may not be true of the methodology courses, I'm not certain, I think there needs to be, I hope there will be, a complete examination of the curriculum, not from the point of view that, hey, this is wrong or this needs to be changed, but rather in light of where society appears to be going, are we including that piece in what we're talking about, what we're teaching, what we're asking people to think about? That's my response to your question.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
You bet. It's so good
to
to
see
see
you as
you.
always, my friend.
Yeah.
You still have that white suit that we got in trouble with in moot court?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well.
Oh, well.
Can I go next?
Okay, and Jim Schwab wants to speak as well, but go ahead, Bill.
Go ahead.
One of my key memories of being in the program, circa 1977, our chairman at that time was Douglas Lee.
Yeah.
And I remember him telling us one day that the planner is never the decision maker. And he meant we should just kind of get that out of our minds. We were never going to have a chance to actually implement anything that we did. And I think I've been reacting about that ever since. I mean, at the time, it went through me like a nail. My career just did not go in the planning direction after I graduated. It went in the law direction. And then I got involved in politics. Now, the first time I ran for office was in Des Moines, 1980. I did not win. Eventually, I got the chance to kind of stick my foot in the door in my city. I got myself on the planning board, and we were drastically overdue for a complete new master plan and a complete replacement of the land use ordinance. And I don't know if it was the lawyer in me or the politician in me, but I just decided to seize the project as best I could, write up all my ideas. What are we doing wrong? What are we doing right? And push as much of it through as possible. And basically that's what happened. And 25 years later, I am now administering the ordinance that I pretty much rewrote. But I think in some places planners do waste the effort to have a little more effort, a little more influence than what they have. It's a personality thing. So I'm interested in what everyone thinks of whether planners should basically sit back and do the topographical studies and so forth, or get involved in other ways.
Bill, let me, if I can chime in right quick, because I had an experience, and Don, you probably know some of the people, so I won't actually call names, but about 8 years ago now, I was involved at the national level dealing with the signage and the impact of signage on small business, which is my area, and dealing with the federal highway and so forth, and had an opportunity as a result of that to attend an event in Maryland here that was basically all planners. And I went in thinking that I was at home, I was among friends, and I was going to talk about some proactive things that they could do as planners. And that was probably one of the worst presentations that I've made, because they just kind of looked at me and said, well, we don't want to get involved in this. You know, this is for other entities within our organization. And I left there very disappointed with the profession, because the folks there were a cross section of planners from a whole lot of, you know, public sectors that could have made a difference in this whole area if they wanted to. So, you know, that was the, you know, your point about planners are not decision makers. You know, that Lee talked to you about was very, it came home in that environment for me. And I moved away from it. And I said, well, let me use my law and my other skills to get something done, which I was able to do.
I'm curious whether anyone else has had this experience. My city is an old industrial city, which is today over 90% minority, and somewhat suburban, but we're too far away from New York City to really be a suburban community. You have to look at what do we have in this town that would be worth promoting. And in my town, it was our historic districts. We have hundreds of remaining houses that go back far enough and are fine enough to become historic districts. That's been the focus of my activity ever since. But should I, as a planner, be pushing that on others, that this is what I think our most valuable resource is?
I think I've seen several hands. Let's go, Cynthia.
And thank you. And I may not answer that directly, but I think it's worth adding to the conversation at this point. I worked as a planner after I came out of the University of Iowa for years. I then realized I really liked to build things, and I worked in public works and then ultimately in city management. And I think it's sad that people tell planners that they're not the decision maker, because in any place that I was working, Pasadena or other cities that I've been in the management of, it's setting the policy, which elected officials can't do. I mean, that's like saying city managers don't make decisions. Yeah, they don't have a vote, but the influence you can have as a planner in the way you drive policy is enormous. Elected officials, maybe not Bill, because it sounds like you had a great background, but most elected officials don't have any background in what it takes to do public policy, regardless of whether it's local or state or federal. And planners are the ones that can help them do that. So emphasizing to people in school not what they can't do, but how much they can do, I think is important. And I just add, as I listened to Don speak, and I heard him talk about the blind spots, you know, and absolutely, and weaknesses. We all learn our weaknesses after it's way too late to do anything about them, I am afraid. What I look at the planners now, and part of it may be, I just was in discussion with the really incredible planner who runs Pasadena Planning now, and think about the flexibility planners need to have to address the social issues that were never anything I learned about in school. And even in my first years in careers. But Don's right, I'm working in affordable housing now as well. And I saw from your bio, Don, that you're doing some of that, and probably others on. But how do we teach people as they're going into planning the flexibility of those social issues changing, evolving, and what you worked on and was key and was the issue of the day now in 5 years may not be there, and you have to keep up. You have to be just as sharp in making sure you're driving that public policy.
Okay, Jim has been, Jim and Bill, I think are next. Jim, you've had your hand up for a while, so why don't you go ahead?
Well, actually, I didn't keep it up at once, but that's I wanted to go back to something you said earlier about weaknesses. By the way, I've been at this for about 35 years, not quite as long as you two, but long enough. And one of the, I want to change the weakness focus a little to a management question. And before I do that, I want to give you a little background on where I'm coming from, which is, once upon a time, I actually considered being a lawyer and then figured out that that didn't really fit me. And maybe that's a weakness in itself. But as Chuck knows, I did a second master's in journalism, so I acquired a strength in communication. And over the years, I did a lot of research projects with, federal agencies like FEMA and NOAA and so on. We produced a lot of guidance for the profession. I was at APA on some critical subjects, primarily hazard related. And one of the things that I figured out at somewhere along the line was that for every weakness that I had in constructing a project team to get those things done, there was somebody else out there that was good at the things that I didn't know how to do as well, or the subject matter that I didn't know as well. And so the art was in constructing the team that would work with me to pull it off. And as long as that was successful, that also served the purpose of making me look good and at least getting those people into the room to help solve the problem. So I just want to add, one of the most influential books of recent years that I have read is not a planning book at all in terms of shaping my outlook on this. It was Doris Carnes Goodwin's book about Lincoln and the Civil War, titled A Team of Rivals. It's a book of political history, but the underlying theme is Lincoln's humility and ability to do exactly what I was just saying, which was to use his rivals, former political rivals, build them into his team, get them working together, and his ability to listen to pull all that together. So I'd like to hear you respond to that as an approach to what you're presenting as the issue of weaknesses, because none of us can do everything, right?
James, I'll take that question quickly. It reminds me of my Puerto Rican sister-in-law, who says frequently, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. And that really is the essence of what Lincoln was doing. And I think it's important, definitely, to understand the rationale that your opponents hold for whatever purpose they're pursuing, and to engage them in a direct and honest way, and to try to propound your views, if you deem them to be worthwhile, in exchange with them. I listened to what Cynthia had to say about her experience and the need to keep up with things as they evolve and change, and be sensitive to those issues, because that too will help you understand or have a perspective on those who pursue the same resources or outcomes as you. That's been my experience. I think you make a good point.
Bill Millar? Bill, unmute. Unmute, Bill. All right. It's in the lower left here. I think I can do it for you. Hang on. I think. Oh, there you go. Good, good.
Bill.
Can you get closer to the microphone, Bill? Yeah, we have a hard time hearing you.
Oh, okay. Let me turn up. Any better? Any better yet?
Not much. Can you? Where's your microphone? Is it in the computer?
Yes. It is.
Get close to the screen if it's a laptop.
hear me now?
Yes.
Thought after a while. Anyhow, man, it's really good to see you after all.
Great to see you.
And thank you so much for teaching the planning law career. Because I think about the things that have been helpful to me in my career from the standpoint of courses that I took when I was in Iowa. The planning law was certainly one of those. Apropos of your weakness section, I also used an elective to go outside of the department, and I took a municipal finance course. And that one I have used in every job that I've been in, and was really glad that I did it. To the comments earlier about the social planning and your great comment about Portland's plan that doesn't include such a large number of their citizens, when this is supposed to be, at least for the rest of the world, the paragon of citizen involvement and completeness and correctness and all the rest of it. Really interesting. I think back, and I think his name was Professor Dave Rainey. Is that right?
That is correct. That is correct.
Yeah. And the one thing, I mean, I had never really thought too much about social issues before I got to Iowa. And Rainey certainly were different kinds of people. But I remember the projects that he sponsored where students went. I think he had a project in even East St. Louis, if I remember it right, but also Davenport and a couple other places. And he started me thinking about that. Then Jim Harris took me under his wing, and I did a sort of independent study with him, reading about housing issues in America. Although I did transportation, I was very interested in housing. My father, my grandfather were home builders, so I had that kind of in the blood. Ironically, today, transportation and housing have come close together again as we think about cities and how they grow and all those kind of things. So what I took from that is, if you think of two kinds of planners that kind of are what we talked about here, the sort of activist and the one that just says, hey, my job is to write the zoning code and enforce the zoning, or whatever that is, the pure straight down the technical side of it. From what I learned from Dave and from Jim Harris and from you was that what we were learning in planning could be applied to really make a difference in our communities. As a result, I chose the path of trying to be an activist. My first job was as a transportation planner in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, that you know probably pretty well from your days in the central Pennsylvania. And only there a short time, then off to Harrisburg and then up and finally to Pittsburgh. And in Pittsburgh, I was there 19 years at the Trans Agency, and how much we were able to participate in decisions made about the development of Pittsburgh and the redevelopment of Pittsburgh, where we're going. I really feel that the planner, properly motivated, does have a great opportunity to help shape decisions. Whether we are the ultimate decision maker or not is kind of an irrelevant point as far as I'm concerned, because as others have said in this call, you certainly as a planner, both the facts you choose to present to elected officials and other decision makers, the issues you tend to look at versus what you don't look at. You're making those choices all the time, and it can really have an influence. And I felt very much that the background of the planner gave me the tools. I didn't know it at the time I was studying it. I remember thinking that Gene Wilson's modeling was really stupid until I got to my first job, and oh my God, there I am working with gravity models and trying to figure out. Yeah. So as I went on, it gave me great confidence that this stuff was in fact useful. So that's perhaps longer, Chuck, than you wanted me to go, but there's a few thoughts. And anyhow, Maz, great to see you. Thank you for your contribution to me, and thank you for those kind words at the beginning of this.
Bill, if I can respond, first of all, great to see you. I don't know if the people hooked up on this Zoom discussion know, but Bill Millar literally wrote the transportation book in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, period. No question about it. And as head of APTA, had enormous influence on federal policy, without any question. I was Deputy Assistant Secretary of Transportation, and certainly understood the policy environment and how important APTA was and your leadership was. Appreciate your kind words. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. Don, I got a question. You actually, there've been several references to it. You've had a lot of experience in Portland. After you wrapped up grad school here, both in planning and law, you decided to head out to Oregon and to Portland, and you worked there. You did the comprehensive plan back in Portland's comprehensive plan. You directed the comprehensive plan back in the 1970s, and you've since come back to Portland after being both in Washington, D.C. and in Pennsylvania. And I know of at least 2 urban planning faculty, neither of whom lived in Portland, but both of whom bought houses in Portland as their retirement homes. It's just sort of like, it's just like, that's the place that a planner should go to. And yet, as you say, it's a city that has tremendous problems with inequality and homelessness and housing unaffordability. That's a huge blind spot. I mean, is there any explanation you have for how this all just didn't happen?
3 words: lack of leadership. The last strong leader Portland, Oregon had was Mayor Vera Katz, with whom I worked directly. And Vera was an extraordinarily talented individual who was a political leader that said, this is what I want to do. If you want to follow what I want to do, that's good. If you don't want to follow it, that's fine. But I'm going to go for whatever goal she set out to do. Prior to that time, my first go round as chief planner, I worked for Neil Goldschmidt, who was another great leader and mayor of the city. But again, it comes down to leadership. And I want to make a footnote, that comprehensive plan work, Cynthia Kurtz was part of that team that we pulled together to make it happen. And so a number of other people, Steve Siegel, who was an instructor, a lecturer on the faculty at the university. Does that respond?
Yeah. It's I haven't been to Portland for about 8 years or so, but it strikes me that some of the things that planners want to see in a community that they live in, good transit, the preservation of historic homes, walkability, connectivity, all those things are wonderful. But you know, and one of the selling points is they quote unquote add value. But the problem with adding a lot of value is that it prices people out. So I just sort of get the feeling that planners are, especially where many of them are coming from, are sort of designing designing communities that they would enjoy living in, but a lot of people can't afford to live in.
Yeah. Well, that certainly has happened in Portland. Just to give you an idea of the magnitude of many of the issues that plague the city, we have a deficit of about 50,000 affordable housing units in the 3-county area, the center of which is Portland. Building 50,000 affordable housing units would be equal to building a small city in Oregon. And the money to do that in the affordable range of activity, heaped on with a regulatory environment that is the result of planning activity, over planning in my view, has put us in a situation where it is untenable. Unless there is a federal intervention on the order of a Marshall Plan, I don't know how we or any of the West Coast cities that have experienced this enormous growth and cost of housing, I don't know how we solve the problem.
So, Dean, you've been quiet. Let's, how do you solve all these problems? Lawrence is a beautiful place to live. Dean is planning director for Johnson County, lives in Lawrence, Kansas. Actually, Dean may be the only person in this space that has been worked in two different Johnson counties, Johnson County, Iowa, and Johnson County, Kansas. But Lawrence, Kansas is a pretty desirable place. How do you deal with affordability there?
It's a major issue here. I'm retired. After 44 years, I finally retired 3 years ago. And I want to credit my 44 years in part to Don, and in particular the University of Iowa. I learned so much there that I didn't know I was learning until after I left, like I'm sure a lot of you. But
Like Bill said that too.
yeah. Looking back is fun. I've enjoyed it. I haven't been involved. I worked for Lawrence for a long time. Lawrence is a bubble. It's not Portland, Oregon. It's a small community of about 100,000. Johnson County, where I was planning director for 14 years, is a county of about 630,000 people, and all very wealthy, very small minority population. So it's unique. It doesn't have the problems. It's a suburban community. What I wanted to talk about, though, is that what sort of underlies what I think Don has been talking about is relationships and building relationships, and that was something that I had to sort of come by on my own. I had the good luck of working with good mentors, people that I saw who were able to make and establish relationships. I think planners have great ideas. The problem is our ability to communicate them and communicate them to the right people. And to get a hold of the leaders, and even people that aren't particularly good leaders, try to at least get our point across to them. And I won't say that I'm great at it, but I learned a lot about it and its role. And this is for you, Chuck. Don made a comment about what you might add to your curriculum. And if there was such a class on building relationships and how to establish them, I think that would be beneficial. I don't know what that actually would look like, but the other part of that is gaining access to leaders. And I think that's one of the most difficult things for planners. And over the course of my career, I had the good fortune of being able to walk into some of the commissioners' doors. I could just knock and walk in. And by the time I left, that was no longer the case. And I don't know if I was just lucky in that regard, but I just know how important relationships are and how hard they can be to establish. And the best relationships are the kind that are the most informal, where you meet a commissioner, at the coffee shop or whatever, and have a conversation. So I don't know, Don, from your career how important that is. I mean, it's hard to imagine a class, but I'd love to have taken it.
Dean, I love what you're saying, of course. I actually had on my list of shortcomings or, on my part, weaknesses. I had interpersonal relations written down, but I'm so poor at it that I didn't talk about it.
No, you're not. No, you were one of my mentors. Are you kidding?
No, I agree. It is so vital to make those connections with people of goodwill, who aren't trying to use you for some purpose, but allow you to use them to tell them what you think and what alternatives you've analyzed and what outcomes you've had. Now, Chuck made a point, he doesn't necessarily realize this when he first connected with me, saying that my career has been the function of planning, training, and luck. He stuck that luck thing in there. Thank you very much, Chuck. I really appreciate it. But he's right. It's the luck of who you get to know. And it's the luck of coming by an opportunity by knowing people of goodwill who have a civic commitment that are trying to achieve outcomes that are good for the community. Bill Millar, that's what you did. I know that. Cynthia Kurtz, that's what you did. I know that. Dean, I know you. I mean, it's instructive. And I like the addition of that to the curriculum. But I think the whole curriculum should be looked at through the lens of equity and root cause.
Okay, let me just add a little bit to that too. Dean, you really hit a home run with that comment, because there's no doubt about it. If you choose to be the kind of player, the planner, and player that wants to have an influence, you've got to be able to communicate. You've got to be able to develop relationships with people. You've got to be able to give value to the decision maker. And the value that planning training gave us can help us give them. Maz will know the guy who was my reason I had such a free hand to do things in Pittsburgh was the chairman of the county commissioners, a guy named Tom Forster. If you didn't know Tom except by on the TV, you would think this is an old style, big city Democratic boss is what you would think Tom was, and not a creative idea in his brain. But that's not true. He was incredibly creative, and he wanted what was best for his city and his county. And he really, for those of us who could show him, hey, we can help you get your agenda further along, and his was in my mind, a really good positive agenda for people, then he would buy into what you were saying. And he was a born and bred North Side Pittsburgher, and there's hardly an Iowa farmer with a more narrow mind in his upbringing than that. But he could recognize that he needed others to get things done. And so the communication issue, as I think back to the curriculum in Iowa, ironically, a professor there that I didn't get along with particularly well was Barbara Bailey, but she had one course that really mattered to me, and that was a design course and making presentation of your thoughts and ideas, and that was helpful to me. So, Chuck, I would add to what Dean and Maz had said. Somehow getting a communications course in there in several different dimensions, and I'll bet that Dean and Maz and I would be willing to give you some ideas. But hopefully there'll be some younger people who are working more actively than us that could really help you with that.
Well, we're just making, there's a new strategic communications master's degree here at the university. It's not obviously related to planning per se, but it's related clearly to communications. And that is certainly a place, but I think just in in all of our classes, I think, unfortunately, I'm getting chats from people, but for some reason, the people who are sending them, I don't have the names. But somebody said, I'd like to give a little input on our current curriculum. I think that's Lucy. So Lucy, would you like to do that?
Yes, it's wonderful to hear from you. So I came to the University of Iowa in 2004. I'm currently the associate director, so I have not met some of you, but I have read some of your work. So it's wonderful to put a face and to see you're here and hear your connections to Iowa. It's amazing what you're describing as your weaknesses, and I'm thinking in the light as an educator, what we're providing our students today. When students coming in and ask, why should I come to Iowa? What I typically tell them is, we're a program where you're going to get public finance, and you're not going to get that in a lot of planning programs, because exactly what you're describing, that this is essential when you get into an agency, for-profit, nonprofit, government, whichever level, you need to understand budgets. And so we have a class that's taught by Phoon Nguyen, who is just dedicated to public finance. So we've met that gap that you had some years ago. The other item that you mentioned is about, computer tech savvy. That's changing. Most of our students are there, and that's what they want. They want GIS, they want high-tech work, and if anything, we're trying to rein that in and say, well, you also need planning theory, right? Because they would just want the skills and the technical skills otherwise. So I think they're fairly strong when they come out of our program, but that's probably the same everywhere across the country. When you describe examining the curriculum, Black Lives Matters is happening where I'm on the street most days. I mean, it's all around us. And we've talked with Jerry, who's right here as well, and Chuck a few days ago, and we just started a review of our curriculum in that light. Now, the students who are here don't know yet because that just started, but we asked faculty to look at every course, whether it's statistics, whether it's transportation, environment, whatever, right? at what point does race come in? About source of the problems, strategies to address problems, right? At what point does gender come in? Immigration status, LGBT, right? So when do you discuss that? And I'm guessing we're going to find major gaps, right? In our curriculum, if you think of a matrix, right? Every class and every topic, there will be areas that are not covered. I think income inequality, we're probably quite strong at that because of economics classes of poverty, housing, community development, that comes up. But on gender, for example, I think we have a huge gap. Okay. I don't talk about gender inequality in my classes, right? I'm sure my colleagues don't. I'm not sure, but I'm 90% sure, right? So I think we're doing just what you're arguing for, and what triggered that for us is, you know, the mood of the day, which is what are the root causes that are leading people to identify a breakdown in the social contract, and starting to put these words as a justification for rebellion and action, and asking for a fairly fast change. So I think we're on it. We may not be on it 100%, but I think we're on it. What I'd love to hear from you is something that we haven't quite dealt with, is how do we deal with the pace of change? Our students often want things to change just now, right? And we'll talk about planning process. We have an elected official in Iowa City who wants change just now. And things seem to take very long sometimes. And right now, the mood seems to be at very fast change. I mean, I've never seen discussions of police defunding happening within days, weeks, right? Can you tell us a little bit about your perspective on the pace of change? What triggers quick change, slow change? Does it make a difference in the outcomes? That's something I don't think we've actually looked at very much. The timing of things, or the different temporalities that may be involved in making change happen. I'd love to hear about that from any of you, really.
Lucy, my thought about it is really that for many years, maybe for as long as the profession has existed, there has been an argument that it essentially, especially from those who might be viewed as change agents, or even affiliated with the left wing and all that business, there has been a discussion of planning being the victim of incrementalism. I'm sure you've heard this term. I'm sure you've read about it, but it's true. And it's true because it's a blessing and a bane. The blessing is that we have achieved codification and program structure and all the business and all of that for things that are important to livability and progress, whether it be transportation or any other endeavor, economic development. But the reality is that the bane is that it drags change. So it is inherently a drag in keeping up with rapid change and adaptation. I don't have a solution to that in terms of professional behavior, except that if there's not a recognition by the leadership of whatever entity you're serving, and I'm talking corporate or nonprofit or public entities, if there's not a recognition by the leadership of those organizations of the importance of understanding and being informed about change and being able to adapt to the change, including learning new things and doing different things, then you're in trouble. And I've tried to keep up. I may be getting a bit too old to really keep up. This predictive analytics stuff is, exotic from my standpoint, yet I think it's a driving force for the profession. What about others? What do you think?
Well,
Bill?
reach in again.
Can't hear.
Okay, go ahead, Major.
No,
Major.
go ahead, Bill. Cynthia's going to talk. Go ahead, Cynthia.
Well, maybe Bill, maybe just hit your button because we can't hear you and we'd like to, if you can make it go a little higher. The process of going through government has always driven me nuts. And yet I have admitted over and over again that what happens at the end is always better than it would have been with quick change. And it sticks. Quick change is really glamorous. and you can pat yourself on the back, but it doesn't often stick because enough people aren't there and involved and learning and understanding why. Pasadena is a little town. It's got 140,000 people. We had 43 advisory committees. We had advice on everything. And so everything took forever. And you know, you can go through all the jokes of, yeah, so every council person could appoint 43 people off of their campaign. And some of that is true and whatever. But once things got through that process, they were better. Maybe only incrementally, but they were better and they stuck. People stayed with them and they're there today. So it's not a flash in the pan. So yeah, I mean, I understand what people say, and watching today what's happening in our world, I hope, and feeling that maybe there is some change coming that needs to come. But if it comes so fast that it doesn't bring enough people along believing in it, I'm afraid it won't be.
But if let me chime in, if I may, why, Ms. Lucy, to some of the concerns. Part of the change that we talk about, and we say that change is, you mentioned that some of the changes are coming so rapidly that have never come before. But we also have to look at the steps before these changes. I mean, so Chuck talked about some of the economic activities, and Don did too. But if we look at, and we don't have to, I mean, we can look at Portland, we can look at Washington, D.C. I was just in New Orleans last year, and we were talking the same thing, where the city is in the process of trying to revitalize itself. And in the process of doing that, it's coming up with bike paths, it's coming up with fancy condominiums, and it's coming up with all of these types of things that actually bring economic growth theoretically to the area. But in doing that, it's also pushing out the very people who are living in these particular areas who cannot afford a $2 million condominium, who some of them can't even afford, you know, if they, you know, the apartments. Many of the folks who are being pushed out are now being pushed out into areas where they need transportation to actually get back into their jobs. And transportation is not, you know, it's not that type of transportation. So the change that may look like it's coming very quickly is really not necessarily coming that quickly for those who have been so adversely impacted over the periods of time. And I think, you know, from a planning standpoint, when we talk about the things that Chuck, you talked about, you know, the bike paths and the freight transportation and all of these things, you know, I think to some extent we have actually overlooked the impact of that negative side of that type of development. And Don, you mentioned inclusivity, and that's where this all, you know, begins to move in. So I was in Baton Rouge, and many of the businesses in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, were complaining to us because their workers have now been pushed further and further away from their job sites because of development, housing developments, new highways, and things like this. So you get this breakdown in that type of infrastructure, and thus, as a result of that, you ultimately began to get things that's occurring today.
Since all of you have the experience of being in downtown Iowa City, let me speak from an example of Iowa City. Downtown, of course, when you guys were here, the old downtown, I think, was still present. It was, urban renewal was just beginning. Correct me if I'm wrong. So those of us who arrived, I've only been here 12 years, so I know what it looks like now, but I know it looked very differently. But you know, there are a lot of historic buildings in downtown Iowa City. You know, I had a conversation yesterday, a meeting with a faculty member in the School of Theater who is uh, uh, has been asked by the city to develop a mural that would be painted on one of the parking garages that was part of that urban renewal project at the corner of Burlington and Clinton. This would be a quote unquote Black Lives Matter um, mural. And this faculty member is very interested in doing that. And but she wants it to be more than just a mural. And so she contacted me, and she contacted one of our grads who is oversees community engagement for the university, Nick Benson. And we just started a conversation about how can we develop ideas, concepts, plans for downtown Iowa City that builds on what Iowa City has become, which is basically an entertainment center that feeds off the students, but also some high-end restaurants that feed off the people who have decent incomes here. You know, sort of the gentrification of downtown, and with the student, you know, splash of students in there as well, depending on what time of the week it is or what time of night it is. How do we make the place more welcome for people for whom normally there aren't any places for them to go to because they can't afford the restaurants, they don't want to spend time getting drunk with students, but they are looking for economic opportunity. They're looking for places to sell food, sell goods and services, whatever. How do we build that in there? So we're just beginning a conversation, but again, how do we take something that is gentrifying, like downtown Iowa City, and make it more inclusive? Since you all have Iowa City in common, this is a chance to get some free consultation advice.
Well, I forced Iowa City to be inclusive when I came on campus because I needed a haircut, and there was no one there willing to accommodate that. But I ended up actually finding a barber. I think it was on the corner that said, "Come on, I'll try. You know, I've never cut African American hair before, but I'll try to cut yours." And he did a darn good job. And from that, someone was talking about relationships, and we started building a lot of relationships around the business, sector with some of the local banks, some of the legal community, and so forth. So I think this inclusivity that you're talking about has to be one where the ideas are developed and built around the needs of the individuals. I mean, out here we have different types of settings where the food trucks can actually come and congregate, and people can get a good sandwich at a reasonable price and things like that. And we also have similar type settings where arts and craft is available for those starving artists and so forth, where they can actually display their products and things like that. So I think it's got to be developed around around the needs of these individuals or the groups of these individuals. And I think you'll see much more activity from them participating in these types of things. I mean, the restaurants you're talking about, I would imagine that many of them have workers that they're paying them. I don't want to, criticize, but the restaurant industry, they're probably paying them minimum wage. So, they work there, but they don't have the freedom to actually eat there in a real sense because they can't afford to bring their family of 3 or 5, whatever that number may be, to pay the full cost. So you have to the food truck type concept and things like this, and concepts that actually these concepts out here have actually encouraged a lot of these entities to actually go into business. So it becomes not only providing the service, but also a business entrepreneurial type development process.
Chuck, I guess, I mean, building on what Major has said, the only tools that I can see that we can employ is economic integration, by which I mean not only opening economic opportunity, including increasing minimum wage and that sort of thing, but a range of housing choices at prices various strata of people can afford, and to do that within the community, not through suburban gated community solutions. Those are not solutions to the issue. They're certainly a choice and one that can be made, but in Portland, which is arguably the most gentrified large city in America, where we have displaced literally thousands, maybe 100,000 people out of what has traditionally been our African-American community. That displacement has caused the disruption of so many lives. I mean, we know the consequences of it. The only solutions that I can see are those which allow for a broad spectrum of housing choice and prices. I don't know, plus the job component that Major discusses. I'd be interested in Cynthia's view of this.
You have a lot more experience than I do, Don. I'm just beginning to, I'm employed now as an advisor to a National Core Renaissance, which is an affordable housing developer. And it was selected by them to work for them because I know the San Gabriel Valley where Pasadena is, and I know a lot of the other cities. I've either done consulting for them or been intermanager or something. And so to help them move into that region and find the right places. What I found is that cities are so different in the way they respond, and it's disappointing to hear, given that I lived in Portland for 10 years and loved that city, the way they are responding. But I do know that cities respond very differently. There are some that accept their social responsibilities, are proud to wear that banner. And if you're a planner or consultant or whatever you are, it's very different experience than talking to people in some cities that will say, well, I think maybe we could do some senior.
Yeah.
I think that maybe work. And it kind of goes back to that fast change. I mean, what you really want to do is just bring in a permanent supportive housing project and plop it right down there and say, prove me wrong that this is a problem, but you can't do that. You can't do it literally, and it wouldn't work if you did. And so you say, okay, I just happen to know some seniors that are homeless too, and we will work this out somehow. So it's, and it may not be directly on point, but just trying to think of the different things we've talked about as part of this conversation, which has been really interesting. Social change, I think about it a lot more as not being a city official. It's one of those weaknesses and blind spots and disappointments that I would admit to, because there was so much going on as both a planner and as in city management that didn't just get to that. And being outside that and be able to work in it and see how cities react to the social needs and the social changes that have to happen has been a real experience. And Lucy, if you can come up with a class for that, I'll come back to Iowa City and take that class in a minute.
There's another piece that comes up in Iowa City, and there's a question of education, which we haven't talked here, right? So housing discrimination, we know segregation in space, we know business access to finances, we know. But another part is what happens in the schools, right? In the prison system, we're starting to pay attention. But in the school, the gaps by race in terms of achievement levels are gigantic. They're about 40% in Iowa City, right? Despite the commitment to good education and high funding, and I mean, there's no particular special issue in the schools, right? No massive crime, right? But even with that, the gaps between blacks and whites are about 40%. And, 80% are of whites are college ready, say, and 40% of blacks are college ready. And that's happening in the same schools, in the same buildings, right? So I think the discussion about white privilege and supremacy, and that's starting to bring up to the attention of the general public, these kinds of issues. The demands of the Iowa Freedom Riders include review of the primary school and all the way to high school curriculum. Like, that's something planners haven't engaged yet with, but yet schools are connected to neighborhoods, and where you can live is very much determines what school you go to. So I think that's another piece that, because our school districts are independent from our cities, it's hard to see how we could bring that together. And maybe these relationships are where it's at, but it's been difficult here anyways to build relationships between city planners and school districts. But it seems essential if the quality of life and professional outcomes for these kids are going to be better, that starts at school, right?
Yeah, on that subject, sitting in Chicago and married to a retired school teacher, and we have guardianship of an 11-year-old grandson at the same time, and COVID put all those kids back at home, dependent on parents of varying quality, varying skills. It has highlighted brutally the technology gap among families, the digital skills gap. There are a couple thousand students that the Chicago Public Schools have completely lost track of since they all went home. Even though they have these programs, they distributed Chromebooks to anybody who needed them, but somebody had to go get it from the school, right? Even there's a gap. I mean, I could go on, and I can see our time's probably running down, but what you just highlighted, probably, I don't know whether the gaps are comparable between Iowa City and Chicago, but they are stark here in terms of who has those, I mean, our grandson has the good fortune that my wife's a school teacher, retired school teacher, and can work with him every day to keep him up to date. But I am sure that there are thousands of families in Chicago where that's not happening.
Interestingly, and I don't have her name, but I think she's a senior at City High who won a national award, the Robert F. Kennedy Award, for her research she did that was published in the Little Hawk newspaper of City High on the discrepancies, basically the what is it called? The detention to prison or the school to prison pipeline that exists really, or in City High, in lovely, wonderful, bucolic Iowa City. So it's, in fact, I will try to find that and send it out. I've been meaning to look that up. This young woman was interviewed on Iowa Public Radio this past week. We've been joined, I think we've been joined by several other people. C. Martis, I think it's Carol Martis, but unfortunately the microphone is not hooked up. And then Tom Clark. Tom, class of 1969, overlapped. We were talking about you earlier, Tom. Say hello, Tom. You got to unmute your microphone first. There you go.
Hello, everyone. How nice to be back in Iowa. I'm sitting here and noticing that I have a halo over my head. It's not real. It's a light, but I'm trying to catch up to your discussion here. But I just want to say how pleased I'm to be here, and also how concerned I am about the state of the nation, and in particular the plight of minorities. And housing certainly is a central challenge for us. If people live and work apart, their cultures, the way they live will diverge, and we really need to find a way to foster greater contact amongst people of different backgrounds. I don't see any other way to bridge the gap and to begin to address the serious income inequalities that we face. These were the subject of some of my early work. I was teaching at the time at Rutgers, and I wrote a book on minority suburbanization. And in sometime after that, turned more to the subject of economic development. Today, by the way, I'm up in Idaho, and I chair our urban renewal agency in the little town of Victor, which is just west of Jackson Hole, Wyoming, over the pass. But I can tell you, even here, the issue of housing and affordability, being down valley vis-a-vis Jackson, is a very serious challenge. And we're working on it, updating our comp plan. And even at, I'm going on 76, even at this age, I'm determined to make a difference. And I hope all of you will as well.
Tom, this is Don Mazziotti. This is wonderful to see you, number one.
Hi, Don.
So are you working full-time up in Idaho, or?
Oh, no, this is a volunteer position, chairing the Urban Renewal Agency. But I will tell you that Don, I'm so impressed with your achievements in a long career that's about as long as my own. But there is every reason for academics to get involved, and in doing so to learn what the textbooks don't teach. Yeah. And I must say, I've become seriously expert in matters associated with tax increment financing and the like. And to see it firsthand and to grapple with the complexities and the equity implications has been a real education for me. And I continue, I think, Don, as you are, in learning every day.
Well, you know, you could just go down to Interstate 80 and drive west.
Yes.
You'll hit Portland, and you could stay at my place if you want. And so could anybody else that wants to do that.
I'll be there next week.
Okay.
And Chuck, it's so nice to see you all. You know, I graduated from Iowa. Well, the urban planning was, I guess, 1969, right, Chuck?
That's what your record show. I cheated. I looked up your transcript.
And then I went on for a PhD in geography, and Iowa had a fabulous sort of quantitative theoretical geography program, and I became involved in mathematical modeling. Then went on to teach at McGill and Middlebury and Rutgers before I came to Colorado. Then I retired in 2011. But you have to suppose that putting in so many years, you do learn something, and I think I have. And I'm really trying to do my part to make a difference.
Fantastic.
So Tom is, I learned this a few years ago, but both Tom and his brother were from Iowa, became urban planners. Yes. Brother Rick chose to go to that other school
yes.
That shall be unnamed, and was eventually went to the city of Des Moines and eventually became city manager of Des Moines. And I'm not sure, Rick moved to Ohio, I believe, and I'm not sure what he's doing right now.
He's in the process of moving from Florida, if he can survive the virus, to Atlanta. But he's retired. But folks, he was the city manager of Des Moines for many years. In fact, the new administrative services building has his name on the front. I'm very proud of my brother. I think he Des Moines did some wonderful things in his tenure. And it shows a lot can be done with goodwill and determination, and also kindness, just to find a way to work with people and to find a language that communicates. We're suffering so much because people haven't found the words that we need to be collaborative.
Well, on that note, listen, this has been really good. And this has been a great conversation. Don, I want to thank you for agreeing to do this and sharing your thoughts and getting a conversation rolling. Yes, I want to thank you, all your loyal classmates. You know, the class, I think I wrote you in an email, but that your class and the classes around it are pretty spectacular in terms of, you know, not just what you all have accomplished, but the values you brought into planning and that you carry with you. And it's really good to have these kinds of conversations to remind ourselves of the importance of planning. Just want to close by, I think most of you know that we've gone through another name change. We had one 10 years ago. For like 4 decades, we were the graduate program in urban and regional planning. And then 10 years ago became the School of Urban and Regional Planning. And one of the sort of the shifts began a long time ago. Bill, Bill Michelson were part of this, was the increased emphasis on public policy in the curriculum. You know, we were always distinguished ourselves from that other school that I just didn't mention by the fact that we're the policy program and they're the design program. And that sort of got started, I think, when you were a student in the 70s. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, it's all my fault.
It's all your fault. And people like Doug Lee, and then later Dave Forkenbrock, who I knew in graduate school, were part of that shift. Andy Isserman, who was on the faculty as well at that time. So we've always been a fairly public policy oriented program. And so we decided a couple of years ago, in cooperation with the political science department, to put in for a new degree that sort of builds on our existing public policy approach, a Master in Public Affairs. Iowa did not have a School of Public Affairs, still does not have an accredited School of Public Affairs, and that's something we're seeking to do. So the name change was a response to the addition of the second degree. Some of you, there used to be a public affairs degree. Cynthia, maybe you took some classes. There used to be a Master's of Public Affairs in Political Science. And that we're basically resurrecting that program. And there are a number of our students that took courses there, and some of them even got joint degrees, both in planning and public affairs. So we want to see some more city managers coming out of our program, either out of planning or out of the public affairs. And we appreciate the role that you played and all of you have played in terms of leadership. I think all of you got a letter from me recently. You know, the state is planning budget cuts, and they haven't been cut yet, but we certainly would appreciate financial support. I didn't want to make this about just simply a pitch for money. But we would certainly appreciate it. And if you can't find that email, just go to our website and in the upper right-hand corner at urban.uiowa.edu. And in the upper right-hand corner, it says in small letters, maybe they should be larger, Janet, give. And maybe we should say give with an exclamation mark, but we'd certainly welcome any gifts that any of you or any of your classmates would like to make. Thank you very much for doing this. We plan to do this again. I think the format that we had for some brief remarks followed by discussion is a good one. And Don, again, thank you for kicking us off. If you want to make any closing remarks, this is your chance. Yeah. You got to unmute yourself first.
Unmute yourself.
Trying to keep my dogs from bothering everybody. No, I just want to say it's so great to see people and to hear what you think, because I know it reflects lots of years of accomplishment, amazing accomplishments. I mean, frankly, you look at the list of folks that are on this call or on this discussion and who came out of that era, and I'm sure other eras and the planning department, and it's, you know, it speaks for itself. The only thing I would say that I haven't said is I think a methodology that we all ought to think about and reflect on and maybe try to communicate is looking at the social costs of what we do, the plans that we put together, quantifying the social costs and communicating those costs to demonstrate that without any doubt, the social costs of the absence of affordable housing has concomitant consequences that affect everyone. And I don't think that I've done a very good job in my work of quantifying the social costs and communicating them. And that's what I'm trying to do now as I work with the homeless, as I work with people who are displaced, as I work on affordable housing, is discovering that I haven't effectively quantified and communicated the plight of nearly 40 million people out of work and 2 million people with no place to live. That's it.
Thank you, Don. Thanks everybody for joining. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Don.